Happy holidays my lords and ladies, this is the Samurai back again for another Remnant 2 video. Plasma Cutter is one of the weapons that caught my interest in the past, however I did not have the key items to make it one of the best damaging weapons in the game. So I have updated this build and come up with a fun and monstrous DPS build, which is the Relentless Pulverizer. The Relentless Pulverizer relies heavily on the Plasma Cutter to deal heavy damage to targets. This build's high fire rate percentage improves the Plasma Cutter's prowess and allows the build to have a constant access to its skills, making a skill loop that maintains high speed fire rates that can blast through anything with superbly high damage by relentlessly melting enemies with Plasma Cutter. Now time for the actual build, and starting with the Relentless Pulverizer's archetypes. The prime archetype for this build is the Hunter archetype. We will be going for a high critical chance while relying on the Plasma Cutters in this build, so the Hunter archetype is the perfect class for this setup. We will be using the Hunter's marked skill for this setup to take advantage of its 15% range damage and 15% critical chance increase. Its prime perk, Dead to Rights, is perfect for increasing the duration of the Hunter's Mark skill whenever the user hits a weak spot, which will be an easy feat for this build. The Hunter archetype's insane perk, Deadeye, provides a whopping 40% flat range damage, 15% weak spot damage, and lastly another 5% range critical chance. Moving on to the second archetype, the Gunslinger will take the spot. So you already realize that we will be using our Hunter Gunslinger combo on this one to bolster the Plasma Cutter's prowess. Selecting this archetype will allow us to access the skill Bulletstorm, which grants the build an additional 20% fire rate and 50% reload speed. Its damage perk Swift Shot provides an additional 15% fire rates, 25% range damage, and 5% critical chance, further increasing the build's overall damage per second. Now that the archetypes are out of the way, let's now move on to the Relentless Pulverizer's weapons and trinkets. As usual, I will be giving alternative suggestions later on. Now starting with the long gun. The main damage dealer and the pillar of this build is the Plasma Cutter. Its unique laser beam cuts through enemies and damages targets at high speed. It's powerful and overall satisfying to use. However, the main drawback of this weapon is it accumulates heat over time upon usage and overheats, which we can do a workaround and we will be discussing later on. The Plasma Cutter's unique mod Heatsink allows the Plasma Cutter to generate 50% less heat and ramps the damage cap to 3 times. Meaning this mod will drastically improve the Plasma Cutter's performance, making it even more deadlier. For the Plasma Cutter's mutator, I decided to use Momentum, which is the best slot for DPS setups. This mutator adds more critical chance and critical damage for more damage multipliers to the build. Now for the handgun. We will only be using the Plasma Cutter in terms of dealing damage in combat, so the Corrupted Pistol is perfect for this build. Its Death Brand mod engraves the surrounding targets, which increases their incoming damage by 10%, while enemies killed while bearing the Death Brand will leave a special echo. Enemies that will pick up the said echo will suffer 10% more weak spot damage, and overall a very useful mod for this setup since it can provide the Plasma Cutter more damage. For the Corrupted Pistol's mutator, I am using the Failsafe mutator to take advantage of that 15% chance to not consume the Death Brand's mod charge when using it. The melee weapon for this build is the Atom Smasher with Tiny Blade mutator for aesthetic purposes only. We will not be using it in combat and focus only on the Plasma Cutter. Now that the weapons are out of the way, let's discuss the Relentless Pulverizer's trinkets. Feel free to be creative on this, and I will be providing alternatives later on. But before anything else, if you are into straight to the point guides, tips, and tricks like this one, consider subscribing to the channel. Liking the video will surely help me a lot, and consider joining the Empire today, and your support is greatly appreciated. Now on to the next step. First off, to maximize the damage of the Plasma Cutter, we need to maximize the effect of the Devour Loop Ring, which gives the build a 1% chance to skip skill cooldown entirely in every critical hits dealt to enemies. This will give us the ability to spam Bulletstorm in the process. So you will find familiar trinkets that we already use in our Lightning Emperor build, since this build relies on skill spamming. For this reason, we need all the additional critical hit chance possible while paying attention to the build's overall damage output. Now starting with the amulet, we will be using the Nightweaver's Grudge once again, as this amulet grants an extra 20% critical chance and haste when your character is close to an entity afflicted by a status effect. Achieving this condition is an easy feat since we will be using the Atonement Fold Ring, which I will get into in a minute. The added haze on the other hand is a valuable addition to this build, and a 7% speed enhancement overall is a huge plus, especially when it comes to fire rates. Moving on to the rings, and for the first one, I already mentioned that we will be using the Devoured Loop ring for this setup, allowing us to access our skills on a loop, so moving on to the next ring. The next ring on the list is the Atonement Fold. This ring will make a comeback, so we can ensure that the Night Weaver's Grudge effect will always be active thanks to its self-inflicted bleed status effect. This ring also grants the build another 10% critical hit chance, will help us score even more critical hits. The third ring in my setup is the Probability Cord, boosting critical damage by 13% to improve our overall DPS. The final ring featured on the list is undoubtedly the Xenia's Malice. It enhances weak spot damage by 30% upon hitting enemy weak spots at maximum stacks. With the Plasma Cutter, enemies that have weak spots will suffer a tremendous amount of damage when this weapon reaches its maximum potential. Moving on to the Relentless Pulverizer's armor set. Feel free to choose any set that suits your preference. Just make sure you do not flop when dodging enemy attacks if you decide to wear an heavy armor, given the frequent dodging involved in this build. In this particular setup, I am using the Field Medic set with Navigator's Helm to have that sci-fi or cyborg look and feel. Finally, let's move on to Concoction, and I am using the Bottle of Shadeberry to take advantage of its 10% mod power generation. I also like using Rocket Fuel for fun to further increase the build's fire rate by 10%, so consider stocking up Rocket Fuel starting from here. Moving on to relics and traits, and in this particular setup, feel free to select any relic of your choice. But in my case, I still use the Tranquil Heart to take advantage of its passive 2 health regeneration. For the relic fragments, I highly suggest using additional fire rates, range critical chance, and range critical damage. Moving on to the recommended traits, and the Hunter archetype provides the build with a free level 10 long shot, which increases our weapon's range by a lot, and I see this as a great bonus. The Gunslinger archetype on the other hand provided a free level 10 ammo research, which is a great addition to this setup. This build can spam skills, and using the Bullet Storm frequently will eat up our ammo faster than a jet. Thus, the additional ammo reserves are appreciated, especially when constantly using the Plasma Cutter. For the next trait, I suggest maxing out the Triage trait to level 10 to mitigate the Atonement's Fold self-inflicted bleed by increasing the build's healing capability. This is also possible by upgrading Regrowth trait to level 10 and having that additional 1.5 health regeneration per second. Upgrading Flashcaster to level 10 is a must, so we can cast our archetype skills and mods quickly in combat by increasing the build's casting speed by 50%. The next trait on the list is a level 6 untouchable trait, so we can have that 80% increase in our evade window. Upgrade Vigor trait to level 10 to increase the build's overall survivability. We are relying heavily on the Plasma Cutter's Heatsink mod to deal immense damage, so I decided to upgrade the Spirit trait to level 10 and increase the build's mod power generation by 20%. For my main source of healing, I suggest upgrading Siphoner to level 10 to gain an additional 3% lifesteal damage. Moving on to the next trait, which is a level 10 fitness trait, which increases evade distance by 30% since we will be dodging a lot in this build. This also helps the build to position better in combat. For the last trait recommendation, consider acquiring a level 10 footwork trait, which increases movement speed by 50% while aiming. On the other hand, if you will use the rocket fuel diligently in combat, I suggest upgrading Gluten trait to level 10 instead of Untouchable trait and Triage trait. Moving on to useful gameplay tips and gear alternatives before I wrap this build guide. This build is undoubtedly one of the strongest damage dealing setups out there, and one of its strengths is its simplicity in terms of damage rotation. As the battle starts, I usually start activating the Deathbrand mod when entering the boss arena. Use rocket fuel for additional fire rate for 20 seconds, activate the Hunter's Mark, use the Bullet Storm, and lastly, activate the Heatsink mod and deal damage. By following this rotation, the Plasma Cutter will pulverize and shred anything on its way. Due to this build's 100% critical hit chance and jet speed fire rates, bosses will melt like butter. Not only the build will deal an insane amount of damage during its burst phase, but also resetting both of the build skills in the process. Make sure to refresh both Bullet Storm and Hunter's Mark when they expire so you can maintain that high damage per second and also that insane fire rate. Once the Heatsink mod expires, fire the Plasma Cutter as it will deal great damage even without the Heatsink mod active. However, pay attention to its overheating gauge as we don't want it to overheat since you can lose a lot of DPS during its downtime. To circumvent this, it is suggested to just reload and it will cool itself in the process. Moving on to the alternative gear suggestions. If the enemy simply doesn't have any accessible weak spots, I suggest using the Ring of Infinite Damage to crank up the build's fire rate further. If you want to circumvent the overheating issue of the plasma cutter, on the other hand, you can use the micro compressor ring instead. Lastly, if you want to access the heatsink faster, you are welcome to use the Faerun Sigil to generate even more mod power. That's it for the Relentless Pulverizer build guide. A truly satisfying build to use as it will literally melt enemies. If you learned a thing or two or you enjoyed this video, hitting the like button will tremendously help me a lot. If you want to support the channel, our Patreon link is in the description, or consider being a member of this channel. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you guys can be updated with our latest uploads. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay awesome and safe, and I will catch you on the next one.